Evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Rugby Deconstructed. This week, we'll be looking at Fantasy League and comparing it to the real life rugby. With me via the network, I've got Richard. Richard, how are you doing?
Well, thanks to yourself, Andre.
Good stuff. How you been keeping busy in the last couple of days?
Yeah, it's been interesting adjusting my practice professional-wise over to electronic devices such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams. It's slight little hiccups at the start, but it's running smoothly again.
Yeah, we're using Zoom ourselves here, and hopefully we can get better as we go along. Clive, welcome to the show.
Hi, Andre. Yeah, also we've just been working from home now as well, so it's been interesting. It's obviously tough times for everyone, especially in the rugby world. So let's see. Hopefully things get better soon, especially with no rugby around.
Yeah, you're leaving those France Malherbe pies alone, eh?
Well, yeah, I just came back from Bali and lost about 10 kgs. So yeah,
let's keep them off. All right. So to get the show off, I just want to share a little quote over here with you chaps. All right, we'll cancel that because I seem to have closed the. Give me a second. Yeah, there we go. All right, just give me a second. I've got a couple of problems here. Beginner finger problems, MacBook problems. There we go. Here we go, gents. We've got a quote over here by Mickey Mantle. It's the quote at the beginning of the movie Moneyball. It's unbelievable how much you don't know about a game you've been playing your whole life. And I find that quote, I find myself always going back to that quote every time I read something about rugby that I'm either relearning or I've forgotten about or I've learned for the first time. So for yourself, Clive, I don't know if that holds true to the game that you've grown up watching and playing.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, also you got to think about the constant rule changes that happens over, every 3 to 2 years. And obviously the game's evolving compared to how the game was played in the 1980s compared to now, how expansive it is. Where in the olden days, they used to kick it a lot more. So there's a lot of interest in how the game's evolving and how coaches are adapting to this, the new, running game, as everyone says.
Yeah. Richard, I know you've also mentioned how the game has changed. I know your favorite example is Heinrich Brousseau and how the laws changed after the Lion series to try and negate him.
Yeah. Interesting fact. Looking at Heinrich Brousseau, and this is coming from almost from a BSc background, or when I was doing honors in biokinetics back in the day. We had a test, a machine called the Biodex, which quite interesting showed that Heinrich Brousseau's hamstrings was, I think at that stage, 3 times stronger than his quads, and in terms of pure strength, and suited to the laws back in those days, he was just so quick over the ball. He was, I could say, first on the ground in a way that the tackle ball situation was developed at that stage. He had developed himself physically around the specific set of laws. And when the law changes came in 2010, negating the fact that the advantage that he had, that's when he actually started fading more from the scene on that stage. So physically, the laws changed and he wasn't suited to the laws in terms of his physical makeup, strength-wise.
Yeah. All right. Moving more to the topic of tonight with that in mind and how the game changes. Clive, tell us a little bit how you got into fantasy rugby, and I know you and Andrew will get him on the show at some stage. How did you get into it, and how long have you been playing? What have you achieved in it? Because I know you've done reasonably well.
Reasonably. I was done pretty well, actually. I finished second overall in Super Brew last year. I was constantly in the top 50 at least in Fox. I finished, my highest was also 10th in Fox. But yeah, I mean, actually, I should mention Andrew Howard. He's the guy behind Fantasy Rugby. TV, which has grown quite substantially over this 2-year period. He's actually got me into fantasy in 2009. And I just never looked back because it actually adds an extra dimension in watching, extra excitement. Just instead of just sitting watching the same game, it actually adds a bit of excitement because that's your player. My PP say now you picked him and he goes and scores. It gets you on a nice vibe. And yeah, it makes you basically watch more rugby, which I think at the end of the day, all rugby lovers want to do is watch more rugby. So I think it just adds extra entertainment element to it.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. When I started playing Fox, one of my favorite players was Adam Thompson, and first round versus the Stormers, he scored a hat trick that day. Yes, I was so happy, and Oaks were, all the guys were so upset with me because I was cheering the Highlanders on. Meanwhile, it was Adam Thompson I was cheering on for his hat trick. But I noticed how it made you look at the game differently. You were looking at meters run, breaks, which players cut the line more. In your time, which fantasy players were on the top of the list for you that you think were must-get players?
Well, I mean, I think fantasy, especially Fox and Super Brew, they focus mainly on attacking points, and I think that's where you always used to have a debate in one of our rugby groups, other ones, that some players who play their heart out and make 28 tackles a game, like Lapis Labashkashni, he wouldn't get as much points as, say, now Lamape from New Zealand, because he hasn't obviously got the same run meters or busts or tackle breaks. So, yeah, so I guess, I mean, fantasy rugby can be seen a bit differently to real life picking of a team in real life in terms of a good team. So I guess that's where a bit of the difference comes in.
Yeah.
But me and Andrew spoke about this. We designed a sort of point system on another fantasy platform called Fantasy Rugby Draft, where we tried to add in the points where other fantasy platforms such as Fox and Super Blue don't look at, such as successful kicks out of hand, successful passes, extra points for tackles and pulfers, stealing of the ball and that sort of thing. And I think that's basically improved fantasy rugby to basically include everyone now and to make it, a more rounded sort of platform than what it usually is, just basing it on attacking ability.
Yeah. All right, Richard. I don't know how much you know about fantasy rugby, or if you've ever played it or taken some time to pick one or two things. But statistics itself, from your background and what you've been involved in, tell me a little bit how statistics helps improve players and it helps improve the setup of a team to improve their game overall.
Yeah, so statistics, when you actually mention statistics, it's more something that I look at from a professional point of view, as I use it on a daily basis professionally when, as you say, in an investment field where I actually work in. So when I look at statistics, a lot of the aspects that I usually look at is firstly, variations and deviations from certain norms, which plays a big part both academically and professionally in statistics to identify certain aspects. So first thing, when you mentioned about statistics playing a role there, what I would also look at is deviations from a certain set of means, such as what Clark mentioned, kicks out of hands, certain percentage kicks that's made out of hand, certain tackles made per game, and more look of that in a sense in a wider spectrum, but what are the variations from that norm, and actually pick a player more on the basis of the variations from his actual average of performances to look at getting somebody more stable in. I'm not sure if that's something that you would consider from in your research, Clive.
Well, I mean, it's funny because if you actually look at it, 95%, if not all the top fantasy rugby players in most of the platforms all start in the international teams. If we look at Bowden Barrett, he's the probably top fantasy flyer for the past 3 years. He's number 10 for All Blacks, number 15. Richie Mwanga was like second in points. He starts. Andre Pollard was also top. He starts for Springboks. I can just go on. If you look at RJ Snyman, he was the top lock last year. He played for the Boks. So I think there might be a correlation between, you could say, picking a team on stats. and making a good team. But my thing is, will it last long? Will it be only a short success, or will it be, will it last over a 7-year period? That's the question. But I mean,
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point that I'm trying to find out is in terms of your research that you do you look at variations in terms of saying, okay, a player like, let's say, Beauden Barrett performs consistently at a certain level and there's never a drop in stats from one game to the next. So if you had to plot him into statistically, you look at a deviation from his norm, that deviation is as small as possible, which is from a statistic point of view, what you usually want to achieve when doing research on a certain subject. So would that come into account there to say, well, okay, the chances of Beauden Barrett having an off day in terms of letting you down from your fantasy group wise, would it be is the variation as small as possible to know that he'll let you down compared to an Elton Yankees having a bad day, for instance?
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely true. And I like to pick my fantasy teams. I like to pick a consistent team. So I know like the players that will get consistent points, maybe not, the best points for that round, but they'll definitely get a very good average score. That's why I like to pick my teams are based on exactly that consistency. So yes, I would say that. I would agree with that. Yes, it has to be. Because obviously Alton's a type of up and down player. 1 minute he'll get you a lot of fantasy points for the round. And you'll have one of those disastrous Alton Yankee games and you'll get you minus points. So yes, definitely that's taken into account. But I also like to look at matchups. Matchups is very important as well. I mean, for example, Sunwolves is obviously the whipping team at the moment, and you would obviously want to pick as much players playing the Sunwolves. So I think matchups also play a role in this, especially with the fantasy game. But obviously, looking at statistics and real life rugby, ensure then consistent players, yes, will be put into the team, yes.
Yeah. An interesting, Richard, I like how you brought up Beauden Barrett. Because the interesting about Beauden Barrett is you'll have an off day with the kicking tee and say miss maybe 3 kicks a goal. That's 9 points. But throughout the whole game, you'll be involved in approximately 21 points. Be maybe cutting the line or putting a player away, adding as the assist, or doing a great little cross kick to the wing and the wing scoring in the corner. So if we look at it, what a lot of people don't, I'm talking now the fantasy community, what a lot of the times they don't see is they'll see like a player have an off day and he scores only like maybe 3 points on fantasy. But in the game itself, he was involved in maybe 21 points or 3 tries in the game. So if we look at a player like Dan du Preez, and I know there's a lot of people that rate him, and he's actually extremely talented and a hard-working player. But a lot of the time you'll see him, you'll make a break, make 30, 40 meters up the field, and he holds onto the ball too long, or he runs. His angle of run isn't actually right, and he runs himself into isolation, or he tries to offload off the ground and the ball gets knocked on. So, those mistakes don't get recorded in the fantasy league. And then when you look at Dan du Preez, he's one of the top fantasy scoring players. But when you look at the impact of all those points in the real life and in the real game, the Sharks barely made it to the playoffs last year. So, yeah, I think that's a very important thing where you need to divorce fantasy, the fantasy world from the real world, is the actual impact of what the player's done to win the game, not necessarily for you in fantasy, but for the team in the competition itself.
Yeah. In terms of those that you mentioned, is that where we had the conversation about Moneyball and what they talked about the sabermetrics. Now, in terms of those metrics that were chosen there's somebody like a Dan du Preez, who you say is quite a top point scorer fantasy-wise. But those areas that counts against them, that's if you had to look at it statistically to say, hang on, but yes, you're getting this result, but aren't you moving back in a different direction because of those mistakes that he does make, as you say, making 40 meters, but then it doesn't take into account the 20 that you lose back because of something that he might have done off of that. So what's the net result? Is that net result actually then recorded into fantasy, or is it more the case of just focusing on the player's strong points?
Maybe Clive can add to this, but I know in fantasy you do get deducted points for errors. But in a case if you give an intercept pass, you'll lose half a point. You won't lose 5 points for giving away a try. So the impact of your negative play is a lot less in fantasy. I don't know if Clive agrees or.
Yeah, it definitely is. Like, for example, you'll get about -3 for a mistake or -1 for a miss kick and stuff like that. I mean, compared to like a +10 for a try or +15 points for a try or for +5 for a break and so forth. So definitely attacking points get more than, the negative point in the game. So definitely, yes, that could be seen as, a bit of, that is why we also changed it a bit in the fantasy rugby draft, where we added a bit of more onto errors and penalties. And yeah, that's why I say it's much more rounded. And I can see a big difference, because usually the players that are usually, in the middle ranks in terms of points overall, they're becoming now on months the top of theirs, because they're getting now awarded for actual, for tackles made, for the things that weren't pointed on before, basically. So yeah, definitely makes a big difference.
I think that just got me to my next point that I wanted to quickly ask you, Clive. Using an example, somebody that Andre and myself have spoken of on our previous pods, a player who's currently, I think, leadership-wise, one of the best guys in the country at the moment, Lucanio Am. Now, for me, if I had to analyze him, he's worth 10 to 12 points per game just on the way on defense. He saves you at least 10 to 12 points just because of his, like I said, the way he reads the game on defense and the way that he organizes a team on defense. How would somebody like him actually score in a fantasy rugby setup?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting one, because I mean, he doesn't score well. This, if you take this year, for example, he's not been one of the top centers in terms of fantasy scoring wise, and that's what we can draw to that is the fact that he's not getting rewarded for his defensive stats. Do you know what I mean? Compared to a Lamape or a Eno from the Crusaders that are top centers now, because they are the ones that are attacking and scoring the tries, making the breaks. Where is more being defensive this year than anything else. And I think that's where we can now see the difference between looking at actual rugby stats and fantasy stats. That is actually a good comparison to make now with and the other centers. So yeah, I mean, it's a shame, but that's just how it is, because we haven't really seen him attack that much this year. So, and we can see that now in the fantasy game, he's not one of the top centers ranked this year so far. So yes, as we can see, as an example of how he's rewarded.
Yeah, but as we say that he's been rewarded with I think it's 2 man of the matches before the end of the season, before the break in the season. He had already picked up 2 of the man of the matches for his organization on defense. He had a great intercept try, but that again, it's an intercept try. It's counter attack, taking great opportunity, good reading of the game. Right, as we head to the end of this recording, Clive, can you give us a couple of players that if you had to pack together a fantasy team today from players from yesteryear and players that have retired and players that are currently playing now, can you maybe give us a list of 5 players that you would recommend that you would have on your shopping list?
For fantasy?
Yeah.
Definitely Murphy. I'm sure you remember Murphy from the Rebels last year.
Yeah.
Gosh, that was fantasy king last year. And if you want to use history, I'll definitely say Joe Maloma would probably be one of the most biggest players you will have in fantasy in terms of busts and line breaks and just running people over. And then obviously, I'll definitely, in terms of modern times, we will definitely say Beauden Barrett, because he's just a points machine. And then Lamape as well from the Hurricanes. Also, he just gets points just by running 3 times. You'll get about 20 points just by his bust alone. And another player that we all miss in terms of fantasy rugby was the old Kuni Oosterhuizen from the Cheetahs, when he used to make 50-meter breaks Rosara Bator. Those were the legend days of prop and obviously Nadolo as well from the Crusaders. He was also a big Joe Maloma type player for the Crusaders. And so definitely those were the top players. And there's loads. I mean, gosh, Christian Cullen we can mention. We can mention Doug Howlett.
Yeah,
he was
Rene Ranger, old Andrew's favourite.
Joe Rocococo as well. He would have been also mega in fantasy. So yeah.
Yeah, another one. A little side story. One night we went out to a club in Claremont, and the Free State Cheetahs were there, and they took a dicking from the Stormers that night. And we bumped into some of the Cheetahs players, and one of them was Adrian Strauss, and we were actually standing having a brandy and coke with him. An actual great guy. And he was like, he was really like hard on himself how they let the Stormers put them to the sword. And I got an old mate, Clive Tex Weston, and Clive was and old Tex. All he could say was, "Don't you worry, I've got you in my fantasy league team because you're a points machine." And we always make you captain because you get double points. So you're easy 100 points for me every weekend. So Adrian Strauss was definitely a hooker. I knew you would want to put in your side.
Yeah, the day for the Cheetahs. Yeah, I had him. He also used to have some nice, 50-meter runs.
Yeah, There was also there standing at the back of the mall, so you knew you were roughly a try every 2 games. Richard, anything from you before we sign off?
One point I just want to quickly something that I just touched on, maybe ask Clive, how does this affect fantasy? Taking a player like, using a previous example, something like Jacques Fourie, who was able to play center, wing, and fullback. So I'm not too clued up, but just wanted to find out, in terms of, let's say he was playing center for the Stormers over the weekend, would you be able to choose him as a fullback and still get points on him? Or would that negate the way the fantasy system worked?
Well, basically with fantasy, they set the players in set positions that they think the player will play. So, for example, Jacques Fourie would be listed as a center, but if he was playing fullback, he will still be listed as a center. So he will get still points no matter what. So what I also like to look at is there are some centers in Super Brew right now, like Carter from the Brumbies. He plays on the wing for the Brumbies, and he's listed as a center. And I like to usually put wingers that's listed as a center into that position because they're most likely to score. So that's where a lot of players maybe get chosen when they wouldn't be, because in terms of where the position that they are. Because if Carter was a center, I doubt he would have got as much points as he gets now being on the wing, if you get what I mean. So, so that's also a very nice thing to look at when playing fantasy. But they are usually in set positions. They don't move them. Once the season starts, that's where they stay. I mean, there was also a little mess up in Fox one year with Jed Robinson, the Rebels hooker. He was listed as a prop in Fox, and he was getting hooker points at prop. So everyone picked Jed Robinson at prop, obviously, and he was getting mega. There was like, that's as another example. So how it can work in your favor.
Okay.
Right, Richard, thank you very much. Clive, thanks for joining us this evening. Much appreciated, and I'm sure we'll definitely try and get you on when rugby's back up and running, and we've got some games to talk about and something to deconstruct going forward.
Sure,
thank you.
No problem. Thanks for having me on the show.
Cheers.